The snow swirled gently outside the frosted windows of the cozy mountain lodge, covering the pine trees in a soft blanket of white. Inside, the world was warm and glowing, a perfect contrast to the icy chill of the world beyond. A tall Christmas tree stood in the corner of the cabin's living room, adorned with twinkling golden lights and ornaments that seemed to glisten with their own inner magic. Stockings hung from the stone fireplace, and the scent of fresh pine, cinnamon, and vanilla candles filled the air. Sitting on the oversized couch was Claire, her legs tucked beneath her, wearing a soft red sweater that matched the warm blush on her cheeks. She had a mug of hot cocoa in her hands, the steam rising and curling in the air. Across from her, sitting cross-legged on the rug in front of the fire, was Ethan. He was carefully stringing popcorn onto a piece of thread, his messy brown hair falling into his eyes, his lips curled into a boyish grin. Claire watched him for a moment, her heart fluttering the way it always seemed to when she was near him. It had been years since they'd met. Two college friends who had somehow turned into something more, though neither had been willing to name it for a long time. They'd been through a lot together, but this Christmas was different. It was the first time they'd decided to escape the city, to leave behind the noise and chaos of their everyday lives, and spend the holidays just the two of them, tucked away in the quiet serenity of the mountains. "Remind me again why we're doing this?" Ethan asked, lifting his eyes to hers with a teasing glint. He held up the string of popcorn, which had already begun to sag under its own weight. "I thought we agreed store-bought garlands were good enough." Claire laughed, her voice soft and melodic. "Because it's tradition," she replied. "And because I want the tree to feel like we actually put effort into it. You know, like those old Christmas movies where everything is handmade and perfect." Ethan raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth quirking upward. "Handmade and perfect, huh? Pretty sure the dog ate half this popcorn while we were stringing it." As if on cue, their golden retriever, Bailey, perked up from where he was lying near the fire, his tail thumping against the wooden floor. Claire reached out to ruffle his fur, shaking her head with a grin. "Well, Bailey's just making sure this is a family project." Ethan shook his head, laughing, and leaned back against the couch, letting the half-finished garland rest in his lap. His eyes softened as he looked at her, the firelight casting a warm glow across her face. For a moment, the teasing was gone, replaced by something quieter, deeper. "You look happy," he said, his voice low. Claire tilted her head, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his tone. "I am," she admitted after a pause. "I think this is the happiest I've been in a long time." Ethan smiled, but there was something wistful in it. He reached for the blanket that had slipped from the couch, pulling it over the two of them as he settled beside her. "You know," he began, his voice tinged with that familiar teasing edge, "I wasn't sure you'd go for this whole cabin in the woods idea. Thought maybe you'd miss the city too much." Claire glanced at him, her lips curving into a small smile. "Are you kidding? The city is great, but this is something else." She gestured around them, the tree, the fire, the snow swirling beyond the windows. "This is the kind of Christmas I always dreamed of when I was a kid. Simple, quiet, and—" Her voice trailed off, her cheeks turning a deeper shade of pink as she hesitated. "And what?" Ethan prompted gently. Claire looked down at her mug, her fingers tracing the rim. "And with someone I care about," she finished softly, barely above a whisper. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. "You mean me, right? Not Bailey?" he teased, though his voice was warm, steady. Claire laughed, her nerves easing. She set her mug down on the side table and turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his. "Yes, Ethan," she said, her voice laced with mock exasperation. "I mean you." For a moment, the world seemed to still. The fire crackled softly in the background, and the snow continued to fall outside, but neither of them noticed. Ethan leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her lips, and Claire's breath hitched. She didn't move, didn't dare break the fragile spell that had settled over them. When their lips met, it was slow and deliberate, like the culmination of something that had been building for years. The kiss was soft, tender, and yet it held a quiet intensity that made Claire's heart race. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. "Merry Christmas," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Claire smiled, her hands resting on his chest. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, warmth, and love. They finished decorating the tree, their garland perfectly imperfect. They danced in the living room to the sound of old Christmas records, their laughter echoing off the wooden beams of the cabin. They exchanged small, thoughtful gifts, nothing extravagant, but each one filled with meaning. Ethan had given her a leather-bound journal, knowing how much she loved to write, while Claire had surprised him with a vintage watch she'd found at an antique store, engraved with the words, "For every moment, together." By the time they curled up on the couch again, the fire burning low and the candles flickering softly, Claire felt a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in years. She rested her head against Ethan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat as Bailey snored softly at their feet. In that moment, she realized that this quiet, imperfect, beautiful holiday was everything she'd ever wanted. And as she drifted off to sleep in Ethan's arms, the snow falling gently outside, she knew it was just the beginning of a lifetime of Christmases spent together.